We are wasting heat, Muna. Come closer.
Have you climbed a coconut tree before?
No, but like they say, there's always a first time.
Whispered through the banyan leaves, 1,000 lives in every breeze. Drums that pulse, they softly tease. Time folds the stories we. Echoes rise, they call us near. Through shadowed past, the path is clear. Pleasant tales, the heart can hear. A world reborn in every tear.
Before we dive into today's episode, I need to pause for a moment because one name rose above everyone in the comment section. A massive shout out to Kim Brown, the legend whose comment carried the highest likes. Kim, thank you for bringing that energy, that insight, and that love to this channel. Viewers like you are the heartbeat of this community, and we see you, we appreciate you, and we celebrate you today.
Shadows show, the dance of dreams will always know. Echoes rise, they call us near. Through shadowed past, the path is clear. Pleasant tales, the heart can hear. A world reborn in every tear.
Kim Junseo's stomach began to make a rumbling sound once again. He looked at Muna and asked, "What was it you said about going into the forest to get some food?" Muna smiled and replied, "I'll get back to it right away." She began walking back to the direction of the forest while Kim Junseo opened his eyes in surprise. He had refused to enter the forest because he believed it had wild animals. Was Muna's courage really bigger than her body? But how could he let her endanger her life in that manner? He slowly ran towards her just as she got to the entrance and said, "Wait, I can't let you go into the forest. Wait here and I'll go get us food to eat." Muna smiled and lifted her head up to look at the coconut tree. Kim Junseo followed her gaze and said, "No way, this is wonderful." "I know, right?" Muna replied. "I was actually up there when I saw you walk into the beach. You have no idea how happy I felt. No matter what, Junseo, I want you to live a really long life." "Yeah, whatever," Junseo said. "So where are the coconuts you plucked earlier?" "Didn't you hear what I just said, Junseo?" Muna asked. "I was just about to pluck my first coconut when I saw you approach. I was so happy that I came down without plucking any and ran to you." Junseo stared at her in surprise. He had thought that if he died, Muna would be happy that she was finally rid of him. Who would have thought that she would be so happy to the point of forgetting about her food for a while? He smiled at her and said, "You have already climbed the tree before. Wait here, I'll get the fruits instead." As Junseo put his hands around the tree, Muna asked him, "Have you ever climbed a tree before?" "No, I haven't," he replied. "But you know what they say, there's always a first time." Muna stood and watched as Junseo carefully climbed the tree. She hadn't seen a coconut tree that was that high before, but then again, she barely paid attention to coconut trees. It wasn't one of her favorite fruits, but now she was so grateful to have it, and since the tree had so many coconuts, she could foresee the both of them eating only coconuts for a long time. Except help came sooner than later. Move from there, Muna, before a coconut falls on your small head. Realizing the danger she was in, Muna quickly ran out to the other side of the beach. She wanted to tell Junseo that her head was not small, but then she decided to keep quiet when she realized that Junseo might use that opportunity to say she had a big head. She watched as Junseo plucked more than 13 coconuts before he came down from the tree. They both took one each and went to the rocks. Muna placed hers on one of the rocks, picked a big stone from the ground, and struck the coconut. It broke immediately and the water began pouring out. Muna quickly took it to her mouth so she could drink the water. She tilted her head backwards and held the coconut above her face so the water could directly enter her mouth, but because the stone had cracked other places in the coconut, the water did not just enter her mouth, but poured all over her face and wet the top of her clothes. Junseo stared at her in disgust and said, "You're really gross, Muna." Muna ignored him as she picked up the stone once again and struck the final blow. The coconut broke into different pieces. Since there was no knife, she picked up the pieces one after the other and began to use her teeth to chew off the copra. Again, Junseo stared at her in disgust and said, "You haven't even been here for more than a day, and you have already turned into a wild animal." Muna smiled at him and replied, "I don't believe you are really hungry considering how much time you are spending to evaluate my eating habits." Muna went back to eating her coconut after replying Junseo. He decided to ignore her and husk his own coconut. He believed he was a refined man and wouldn't stoop to the level Muna did, just to eat a coconut. However, when Junseo struck his coconut with a stone, he realized that the water was wasting, and since there was no cup available, if he didn't do as Muna did, he would lose all the water from the coconut. He ended up lifting the coconut above his face like Muna did, and most of the water ended up on his face and neck. He angrily broke the coconut into different pieces. He tried so hard to pull the inner copra out with his hands, but he could not do it. Eventually, he ended up chewing the coconut with his teeth just like Muna had done. He felt embarrassed and turned to look at Muna, but she smiled at him and said, "Don't worry, Junseo. I'm not big on rubbing it in." Junseo and Muna were so hungry, but after eating 2 coconuts each, they couldn't bring themselves to eat anymore and sat beside each other at the beach. As Junseo looked at Muna, he felt grateful that he had decided to go around the island, because if he hadn't done so, he wouldn't have met Muna. They would have been so close to each other, yet so far away, with each thinking that the other did not make it. And even if he stayed back and had food to eat, he would have lost his mind because of being alone. At least here, even if Muna wasn't his best person, he had someone he could talk to. Muna saw that it was gradually getting dark and wondered how she was going to have a bath. Initially, Junseo wasn't here, so she had decided to do it when it was dark, but now with him so close, how would she be able to do so? She also didn't have any other clothes with her. She needed to wash her undies so she could use them tomorrow, which meant that she was going to be sleeping with nothing under. One side of her red gown was already torn and exposed her thighs. Eventually, she would have to take off the red gown and wash it. How was she going to do all these? It kept worrying her until she realized she had a bigger problem. Where was she going to sleep? She looked at Junseo and asked him, "Where are we going to sleep?" Junseo realized he hadn't thought about that, and it wasn't a good idea for them to sleep on the sand. He thought for a while and said, "I can't believe I didn't think about this. It's already dark, Muna, and there's not much we can do without a good source of light. We can lean our heads on the rocks and sleep tonight. Tomorrow morning, we will make a shed for sleeping. I know it would be uncomfortable to lean on the rocks, but we don't." "It's okay, Junseo," Muna cut him. "I've already spent 2 nights sleeping in a sitting position, so I'm sure I can do this." Junseo felt guilty when he heard what Muna said. He knew that the 2 times she had to sleep in a sitting position was because he forced her to do so. Anyways, it turned out to be a blessing in disguise for her now because she had a little experience. After a while, Muna got up and began heading to the water. Junseo stood up immediately and stopped her. "Where are you going to, Muna? Why are you walking towards the sea at this time? Are you a mermaid?" Muna laughed really hard and said, "Frankly speaking, Junseo, I never thought you had such a humorous side to you. I want to have a bath in the water. I haven't had a bath since last night, and I feel really uncomfortable. I know it's already dark, but please respect my privacy and close your eyes." Junseo watched as Muna continued walking towards the sea and said, "It's not like I'll be seeing what I haven't already seen before, but I will close my eyes. Be careful and don't go in too deep." Junseo's statement reminded Muna of how he had broken down her room door and barged in on her naked. What a perv, she thought to herself. She approached the water, took off her panty, and began to wash it. She knew that there was no soap, but she was determined to maintain this panty for as long as she could. She looked behind her and noticed that she couldn't see Junseo from where she stood. She breathed a sigh of relief as it meant that he couldn't see her as well. Junseo sat down with his head leaned on the rocks and stared at Muna. He couldn't really see her, but he could make out her frame. He briefly imagined what it would be like if he could join Muna and bathe together. He shook his head and reminded himself that it was a silly thought. Just as that moment, it began to drizzle. Junseo looked up at the sky as pelts of rain landed on his face and said, "Fuck, we're doomed." Muna had only begun taking off her gown when it began to rain. What the hell? She screamed and wore back her gown. She held her wet panty, which she had just washed, in her hand and ran back to where Kim Junseo was. The rain became more heavy, and as Muna ran back to Junseo, he held her hand and ran towards the coconut tree at the entrance of the forest in hopes that it would provide a cover for them. Standing under the tree didn't make much of a difference as the rain soaked them mercilessly. Junseo soon pulled Muna closer to him as she had begun to shiver from being beaten by the rain. She wrapped her arms around Junseo's body and buried her face in his chest as he held her tightly and gently rubbed her back. Junseo and Muna stood under the tree as the rain fell heavily for more than 30 minutes, and they were completely drenched. Muna was shivering seriously by the time the rain stopped falling. After the rain had stopped, the water from the tree was still falling on them, so Junseo told Muna that they needed to get back to the beach. They held hands together and slowly made their way back to the beach. The sand was very wet, and so were their clothes. They both sat on the wet sand and leaned their backs on the rocks, but it was awfully uncomfortable for them. Junseo wondered what they were going to do, but no matter how hard he thought, he couldn't come up with a good alternative. In the end, he stood up from the wet floor and went to stand by the side. Muna still sat on the floor, but opened her eyes in surprise when she turned and saw Junseo taking off his wet clothes. Junseo took off his white shirt and black trouser as well as his singlet, leaving only his extremely short briefs. As Muna stared at him, she found the situation awkward, but she was more worried about herself because she felt as if she was going to die. She was shivering really badly. She knew that Junseo also felt cold, but it wasn't as serious as her situation because she was already sick from cold and had not healed completely. She was so desperate to get warm that she picked up 2 stones and tried to start a fire. Kim Junseo watched her in disbelief as she labored in vain. When he couldn't bear the sight of her shivering and striking the stones together anymore, he asked her, "Has the cold affected your brain or your eyes? Can't you see that there's no dry wood around? Or are you planning to start the fire with your long hair?" When she realized that she was toiling fruitlessly, Muna threw the stones away and decided to jog around the beach to produce some body heat. She began jogging from one end to another in the darkness. Junseo told her to stop because she was only wasting her time and would only tire herself out. Muna ignored him and continued jogging until her head began to ache. Despite this, she did not stop jogging. However, despite all her efforts, Muna did not get the results she was hoping for as she kept feeling cold and her body didn't produce any sweat. After a while, Kim Junseo walked up to her and stood in her front. He realized it was more windy as he stood closer to the sea. He said to her, "Your clothes are completely wet, so no matter how much you jog, it won't make any difference. Take off your clothes and you will feel a little bit better." Muna moved to the side and continued jogging. Even though it was dark, she could clearly see Junseo when he stood close, thanks to the moon. The fact that he had dried all his clothes on the rocks and was moving about with only his briefs was very uncomfortable for her. How could she take off her clothes? She eventually felt really tired and couldn't jog anymore as her body was still shivering from the cold. She walked back to the rocks and dried her panty, which she had been holding in her hand all along. She eventually sat back on the sand and leaned her head on the rock while she continued to shiver. Junseo soon got tired of standing and wanted to sleep. He realized that he wouldn't be able to sleep with his head leaned against the rocks and came up with an idea. He walked towards the entrance of the forest and picked up some of the palm fronds, which had fallen on the floor. He decided to at least make a pillow for himself. He stacked some of the palm fronds on the floor, just beside Muna, and laid on his back while he placed his head on the palm fronds and faced the sky. He had never longed for his bed and a hot bath the way he did now. He was so uncomfortable and doubted if he would be able to get any sleep with the feel of the wet sand against his back. Even the palm fronds were wet and affected his hair, but he laid there still without a word. He turned to look at Muna, whose teeth were now chattering. He recalled how she had fainted the last time he left her outside and said, "We are wasting heat, Muna. Come closer." Muna ignored him and continued shivering. She wished she had brought her meds along, but realized that even if she did, she would have probably lost them in the sea. She was so cold, but she was afraid of going closer to Junseo. She knew how much he hated her, so how could she pay attention to what he was saying? Junseo decided to ignore Muna, but the chattering sounds her teeth made was getting to him. He recalled how the doctor had said she shouldn't be exposed to rain or cold weather and became afraid. What if she fainted here like she did the last time? He wasn't a doctor and wouldn't know what to do. He sat upright, tapped Muna, who was backing him, and repeated himself. "Come closer, Muna." Muna, who couldn't bear the cold weather anymore, moved closer to Junseo, but he said, "Your gown is wet. Take it off." Muna didn't want to take off her gown, especially since she was wearing nothing else on her lower body, but she knew that there was nothing else she could do about her pathetic situation. She took off her gown from the top and left it at her waist. There was no way she was getting naked when she was so dangerously close to Junseo. Not even when her life depended on it. Even as she took her gown off from the top, she still felt cold because her bra was also wet and so was the lower part of her body. Junseo stared at her and said, "You will have to also take off your bra because it's very wet." Muna refused and said, "No, there's no way I'm taking my bra off." After speaking, she rubbed her palms together fiercely and occasionally paused to rub the hot palms on her arms. It helped a little bit, but her body was still shivering. She felt self-conscious because she was facing Junseo with only her red bra on. It was a designer bra and exposed half of her breasts. She turned her body so Junseo could only see her back even as she continued to shiver. Junseo observed her actions and became angry. "What do you think of yourself, Muna?" he asked. "Do you think I am interested in you just because I'm trying to help you? Even if you were the last woman on Earth, I won't look at you because you do not measure up to my standards, so stop getting ahead of yourself." Muna barely paid attention to what Junseo was saying because she was more consumed with her predicament. Junseo was not only angry but frustrated. He was also feeling cold. Even if it wasn't as bad as Muna's, he also needed the body heat to feel better. He believed that they didn't have any other choice at the moment, but Muna was acting like he was interested in her when he had nothing but hatred for her. He laid back on the ground and decided that he wasn't going to say anything to her again. The wet sand made it more difficult for him, but he closed his eyes and tried to distract himself with different thoughts. The cold wind worsened Muna's condition, and soon she began to whimper as goose pimples appeared all over her body. Junseo watched Muna for a while and got up again. He pulled her closer to his body and tried to take off her bra. Muna weakly said, "Junseo, what are you doing?" "Stop it." Junseo said, "Shut up, Muna. I am not going to let you die here. If you are so eager to die, you are free to do so when we have gotten off this island." After speaking, Junseo unhooked the straps of her bra, while Muna closed her eyes and quickly covered her breasts with her hands. Junseo pried Muna's hands off her breasts and said, "Don't worry, Muna, I promise that I can't see anything. You can see that it's already dark and I'm just trying to help, so you can keep warm." Muna tried to relax as Junseo spoke softly, but she still felt very uncomfortable. Junseo laid back down and pulled her closer to his body, so her breasts were on his chest, and her face was buried in between the crook of his neck. Muna could feel the impact of her breast against Junseo's body, and it made her afraid. She had never been this close to any man before. Miho was the man she loved the most, yet he had never seen her without her bra because she never let him get past it. It worried her more that she couldn't be this way with the man she loved, but was now being so close to a man who hated her so much. She kept shivering while Junseo kept rubbing his hands around her back. Junseo wished he wasn't on the floor, as did Muna, but they figured that it was more important to get Muna's body warm. Eventually, Junseo's actions began to work as Muna slowly began to feel warm. Junseo kept rubbing his hands all around Muna's back, and soon their bodies became heated up, but he was now the one who was suffering. With their naked bodies touching, Junseo involuntarily recalled when he had broken down Muna's bedroom door and seen her naked. He suddenly found himself having amorous desires for Muna and struggled to rein them in. Muna could not bring herself to fall asleep. She felt heated up as well and was no longer as cold as before. She felt more worried when Junseo's breathing became rapid and his heartbeats became faster too. She knew that he wasn't like this initially and wondered if it was because the rain had also fallen on him before or because her upper body was naked and lying on his. She greatly hoped that it was the former, because if Junseo suddenly lost it and decided to take advantage of her, she would not be able to protect herself. Junseo continued rubbing Muna's body, but he knew she had become warm, had stopped shivering, and that he could let her go at this point, but he couldn't bring himself to do so. He didn't know if she was going to start shivering again the moment he let her go, but more than that, the feeling of having her body pressed against his was amazing. He had also been cold and needed to get warm as well, but the downside to everything was that his mind was becoming messed up. His desire began to build up and the middle of his briefs began to bulge. It was sweet torture for him. He tried his best to control himself, but the image of Muna's naked body in her bedroom kept flashing into his mind. Muna realized that Junseo's breathing was getting more rapid by the second and thought of asking him about it, but she couldn't bring herself to say anything. Junseo's hold around her body eventually changed as he now held her body tightly, and the way he now gently rubbed her back with one of his hands made Muna open her eyes because it was now more of a caress. Despite her realization, Muna still chose not to say anything and kept her face buried in Junseo's neck while still feeling uncomfortable. Junseo suddenly could not take it anymore and said in a hoarse voice filled with desire, "Muna." Muna didn't want to answer him, but he called her name again and asked, "Are you asleep?" After keeping silent for a while, Muna said, "No, Junseo, I can't seem to get any sleep." "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Do you still feel cold?" "No, Junseo. My body has been heated up," Muna replied. Junseo further said, "Muna, Muna wondered why Junseo was stuttering. He always spoke with so much confidence and has never hesitated to say his mind before, so she asked, "Is there something you want to say, Junseo?" Junseo struggled with his breathing as he felt ashamed of the things he was about to say, especially since he had bragged so many times to Muna about how he could never be moved by her. When he couldn't help himself anymore, Junseo said, "Muna, I feel very turned on." Muna understood what it meant for a man to be turned on, but she wanted to be sure if it was what Junseo meant, so she said, "What do you mean by that, Junseo? I don't understand what you were trying to say." Junseo replied, "Muna, you know how a man feels when a naked woman's body is pressed against his own." The moment Junseo confirmed her suspicions, Muna tried to get up from his body, but his hand was still circling her back, making her unable to do so. "Relax, Muna," Junseo said. "If you get up now, you're going to get cold because your gown is still wet. Just stay like this." Despite what Junseo said, Muna could no longer bear to stay like that, so she still tried to get up, but because Junseo was still holding her body, she ended up coming face to face with him. As she stared at him, Junseo let go of Muna's back and cupped her face with his hands. Without giving her any time to react, he placed a soft kiss on her lips. Muna jerked away from his body and covered her breasts once again with her hands as she said, "What do you think you are doing, Junseo? Why are you doing this?" Junseo sat upright and placed his hand on Muna's neck as he said, "Come on, Muna, there's nothing there. It's just the effect of the weather." Muna turned her back on him while still covering her bosom. Junseo moved a little bit closer to her, and when she felt his hand on her back, she closed her eyes and said, "No, this is not happening." Junseo caressed Muna's bare back with his hands, and as his breathing became more rapid, he gently wrapped his arms around her from behind and slowly caressed her belly. His hands moved upward from there towards Muna's breasts, but her hands were still covering them tightly. Seeing that Muna wasn't still giving in, Junseo said, "Come on, Muna. You know that under normal circumstances, I wouldn't act like this. But the weather is very cold and my body is craving yours. We don't know how long we would be stranded on this island for. We could be here for months or years, and if you keep being like this, it could get lonely. Even though our marriage is atypical, you are still my wife, so we are not doing anything wrong. Please stop what you are doing," Muna replied. "I can't give you what you want, especially since I've never done it with anyone before." Junseo stared at Muna in disbelief and asked, "What do you mean by you have not done this with anyone before? You dated Park Miho for years, and from the conversation you both had, he seemed like the love of your life, so why didn't you have sex with him? Is he impotent? Is that why you are still a virgin?" "No," Muna replied. "Miho isn't impotent, and many times. He wanted to have sex with me, but I turned him down each time because I wanted to save it for our wedding night." Muna continued, "I was so sure I would end up getting married to Miho, so I begged him to be patient. How could I have known that I would end up marrying you in the end?" Junseo kept silent for a while and finally took his hands off Muna's body. He stood up and said to her, "I will move to the other side of the rock and sleep. You can use the palm fronds as your pillow, and I will see you tomorrow. Good night." As Junseo walked away in his briefs, Muna, who hadn't paid attention to what he said earlier, stared at him in surprise and asked, "Where are you going to, Junseo?" "Don't worry about me, Muna," Junseo replied. "I will find somewhere much colder to rest my head." Junseo walked a little distance away from Muna and turned towards the other side of the rock. He knew that if he stayed with her, He could end up having his way with her despite her disapproval, and that was something he didn't want. The fact that he desired the enemy's daughter alone made him angry at himself. He didn't understand why he lost control of himself around her in such a humiliating way. He blamed it on the cold weather and the fact that Muna was the closest naked female to him. He definitely wouldn't have paid her any attention if there were other women available, and now he needed to try his best to get rid of her naked image from his mind as well as the amorous desires he was having towards her. As Junseo left, Muna thought about what had just happened. She knew that Junseo was horny, and that was why he suddenly reminded her of being his wife. If she was crazy enough to give in and morning eventually came, he would regain his senses and call her a cheap whore, or worse still, berate her for not having enough self-control to stop him from sleeping with his enemy. He was going to regret it when morning came and she would be at the receiving end. She couldn't deny though that when her body was pressed to his and he kept rubbing her back, it had given her a nice feeling that she hadn't experienced before, even with Miho. Perhaps it was because she never let Miho get that close enough. She really regretted denying Miho her body for so many years. He was the man whom she loved, and he had waited for her because of his unselfish love. If he had been the one here with her on the island, she would have quickly given in to him, but how could she do so to Junseo? Only Miho deserved her body in that way. But something troubled her. Junseo had said they could spend months or years here. Would he take it if she kept saying no for so long? She didn't think he was as understanding as Miho and might want to force himself on her. Another problem was her clothes. She had just one panty, a bra, and a torn gown. There was no soap to even wash them. If they ended up staying on this island for a very long time, she wouldn't have what to wear anymore. Would she end up walking naked in front of Junseo? But these were the least of her problems as she began to feel cold once again. The wind kept blowing on her body, and soon she began to shiver again and her teeth began to chatter. Junseo wasn't faring any better. Where he went to sit down was colder than where he had earlier been. He sat on the wet sand and leaned his back on the rocks, but he still felt cold. He knew that his wet briefs contributed greatly to his condition, but he couldn't take it off and end up being naked. The wind kept blowing cold air on his body, and he struggled so hard to stop himself from going back to Muna. He shouldn't have asked her for sex in the first place. He should have just endured and managed himself with their bodies pressed together. At least, they were both warm then and the weather was more bearable. If his clothes were dry, it would have been so much better. He couldn't bear to sit down anymore and stood up from the wet sand while rubbing his body with his hands in an attempt to produce heat. Muna realized that she couldn't bear the cold anymore. Perhaps because her body had been heated up a few minutes ago, she now felt worse than she did before. She realized that the only solution to what she was suffering now was to let Junseo have what he wanted, and the thought of it alone made her begin to cry. Muna wept and said in between her sobs, "I am very sorry, Miho. Please forgive me for what I'm about to do. No matter how much I wish otherwise, Junseo is the only way for me to survive the night, and it is very important for me to survive and return, because I am all my parents have got." Muna wiped her eyes and stood up from the ground. Due to the cold, she bent as she walked in the direction Junseo had earlier gone. She couldn't bring herself to stand erect and kept shivering and chattering as she walked. Junseo was breathing in and out of his mouth due to the cold. He was staring at the trees by the forest entrance at the same time, and as such didn't hear Muna approach. When she finally got to where he was, Muna saw Junseo standing and realized he was also cold, but his mind seemed to be somewhere else. "Junseo, help me," she managed to say. Junseo quickly turned his head to his left side and saw Muna shivering with her body bent. He could imagine how bad her situation was because he was now feeling really cold. He noticed that she hadn't bothered to lift her gown or wear back her bra. Her gown was still by her waist and only her lower body was covered. He quickly walked to her side, lifted her so she could stand straight, and hugged her tightly. He noticed that she hugged him back and didn't mind that her bosom was pressed against his chest. He rubbed her back for a while and moved his hands from there to her neck. He held her neck so she could look up at him, and their eyes met for a moment before he began to kiss her. Muna did not try to jerk away like before, but allowed Junseo to explore her mouth to his heart's content. After kissing her for a while, Junseo lifted Muna, bridal style, and took her back to where they had both been before. He laid her on the sand with her head on the palm fronds and resumed the kiss. Muna closed her eyes and folded her hands as her desires began to build up. Junseo's breathing had become very hard at this point, and he seemed like a wild and untamed lion ready to devour its prey. He moved his lips down to Muna's neck and placed kisses all over her neck. Muna began to moan and feel very excited. Her cold feeling had instantly disappeared and was now replaced with a new feeling, a longing which was foreign to her. She had always loved being around Miho and enjoyed it whenever he kissed her, but the feeling she was experiencing now was different and new. Junseo went below her neck and began to kiss her bosom. He gently nibbled on her areola, teasing her on both sides while Muna became completely consumed in ecstasy. She instinctively opened her eyes, which she had closed all along, and stared at Junseo, surprised at what he could do to her despite the seeming hatred between the both of them. He stopped teasing her and took the tips of her bosom into his mouth, alternating between the two of them intermittently. Muna reached out her right hand and grabbed Junseo's hair as she felt her breath stuck to her throat. Junseo desired to take Muna right there on the floor, to give her intense pleasure and take as much from her, but he recalled what she had earlier said and stopped himself. He knelt and stared at Muna's body as she lay on the floor and also stared at him. Even in the darkness, he could see that Muna was beautiful. Her bosom was succulent and round. Her youthful beauty was intoxicating. He could see why Miho was so crazy about her, and he couldn't help but fear that the same thing would eventually happen to him. Muna wondered why Junseo stopped. She had made up her mind with so much difficulty, but if Junseo decided not to go further, despite experiencing a feeling of disappointment, she would be extremely grateful and more respectful towards him from henceforth. Junseo lay beside Muna and placed his head on the palm fronds. He told Muna to get on top of him, and she obeyed without a word. As she laid on his body, with her bosom pressed against his chest once again, Muna closed her eyes and buried her face in the curve of his neck. Junseo slowly rubbed his hands around her back as he said, "Don't worry, Muna. Let's just keep each other warm. I promise that I won't take advantage of you. You will not have to do whatever you do not want to, as long as I'm here." Muna lifted her face to look at Junseo and said, "Thank you so much. I appreciate what you have done for me." After speaking, she returned her face to the crook of his neck and smiled satisfactorily as she tried to fall asleep. Junseo felt pain in his abdomen and knew that it was because he had stopped himself from going further with Muna. He excused himself and went to the side to urinate. After that, he came back and they assumed their initial positions as they both bade each other good night. Muna woke up in the morning and stared at the sky in happiness. She couldn't believe the sun was shining. She looked at Junseo, who was still asleep, and felt shy when she recalled what had happened between them last night. She couldn't deny that Junseo was a very handsome man and pleasing to the eyes. Now that she was looking at him up close, she could see that his eyebrows were thick and well-arranged. He had a pointed nose and thick long lashes. The curve of his jawline was evenly proportioned, and he had an oval chin. She realized that Junseo was handsome by international standards and could perfectly pass for a model. She quickly got off his body when she realized that her upper body was still bare. She wore her red gown completely, which she felt now had a weird smell because she wore it wet last night. She saw her bra on the ground beside Junseo and quickly picked it up. Because of the sand in it, she ran towards the water and rinsed it. Junseo woke up almost immediately and used his right hand to block the rays of the sun, which fell directly on his face. He saw Muna by the sea washing her bra and recalled what had transpired between them last night. Contrary to what he had earlier believed, Muna was a decent girl. It was still difficult for him to believe that she was still a virgin because she was beautiful and had dated Miho for so long and was in love with him. He was impressed with her level of self-control. He stood up from the ground and stretched his body as he yawned. Muna turned just at that moment because she wanted to dry her bra on the rocks. She stared at Junseo, who was wearing nothing but his briefs as he stretched his body and didn't realize when she began to drool. Junseo noticed her gaze and smiled before asking, "Enjoying the view?" Muna came to her senses and ignored him as she walked towards the rock. Junseo stared at her as she walked away and wondered why she was giving him an attitude. He was being unusually nice to her because she kept him warm last night, but it seemed she enjoyed it more when he was harsh and rude. She didn't even greet him good morning. "Good morning, Junseo," Muna said after drying her bra. Junseo stared at her in shock. She practically took the words out of his mind. Was she a mind reader? Muna was in a dilemma. She hadn't taken her bath in a long time and didn't know how she was going to do so with Junseo here. She would have managed if she had succeeded in bathing last night, but she didn't because of the rain. She couldn't go the whole day without bathing again. And she didn't want to wait till it was dark because she couldn't guarantee that it wouldn't rain. What was she going to do? She decided to focus on brushing her teeth for now. She went to the forest entrance to search for an appropriate stick while Junseo watched her in amusement, wondering what she was up to. When he saw her wash the stick repeatedly and use it to brush her mouth, he instinctively smelled his breath and was shocked by the odor that came out. He couldn't believe he had completely forgotten about the hygiene of his mouth. This island was quickly turning him into a bush animal. He quickly went towards the forest entrance and picked up a stick before joining Muna by the sea. He squatted just like she did and washed the stick thoroughly before using it to brush his mouth. "This feels so terrible," he complained. "I know," Muna replied, "but we haven't got much of a choice. We wouldn't want to kill each other with bad breath." The words had already left Muna's mouth before she realized how they sounded. She had meant that their mouths would smell while talking, but the look Junseo gave her meant that he thought she was talking about kissing. She quickly tried to correct herself and said, "I meant that while talking we could." "It's fine, Muna," Junseo said while smiling. "I perfectly understand what you meant." Muna blinked at him and continued brushing her teeth. When she was done, she rinsed it with the salty water and stood up. The heat of the sun was beginning to make her sweat, and Muna wondered at the contrast between night and day on the island. The sun shone excessively during the day, and the rain poured excessively during the night. Why couldn't it be balanced? As she walked back to the rocks, she kept her improvised toothbrush on top of one of the rocks because she didn't want to end up looking for another one in the evening. She realized that her bra and panty were dry and knew that she would have to move around in them after washing her red gown, but where was she going to do that? Muna suddenly realized that she had much bigger problems when her stomach began making different sounds. She clutched her stomach as her face turned red from discomfort and said, "Oh no." Junseo, who had just finished brushing his teeth, turned and saw Muna clutching her stomach. He walked towards her and asked, "What's the problem? Are you in pain?" Muna stared at him for a while, feeling ashamed. When she was attacked by a second wave, she said, "Junseo, I need to poo." Junseo began to laugh. "Is that why you look as if you want to die? Go and poo right away." Muna kept staring at him without moving until Junseo finally realized what the problem was. He walked to where the sticks were kept and picked one up, after which he walked towards the curve of the island and dug a pit with the stick. He dropped the stick beside the pit, walked back to Muna and said, "I have dug a pit for you, and it's closer to the water. Do your business there and clean yourself up so you can be free." Muna stared at him while he smiled and said, "The answer is no, I won't look at you, and yes, you're welcome." She turned and hurried towards the pit while wondering how Junseo knew the things she wanted to say. True to his words, Junseo turned his back towards where Muna was and decided to learn how to make a fire. If Muna could do it, so could he. He gathered the few dry sticks which Muna had used and struck two stones against each other. However, despite the effort he put in, he was not able to make a fire. He felt ashamed of himself and didn't want to give up, but Muna came from behind him and said, "I can teach you if you ask nicely." Junseo ignored her and kept trying until he became frustrated and angrily threw the stones away. "How do you feel now?" he asked Muna. "I feel better," Muna replied. "I think it's time to have my breakfast," Muna said and walked towards the forest to pick up some of the coconuts on the ground. Junseo sighed sadly and said, "I can't believe I'm about to have coconut for breakfast. I actually hate that fruit and now I'm stuck with it. I am seriously craving meat." Muna shook her head in disbelief and said, "You're such an ingrate, Junseo. Having a coconut tree here is a blessing. You get food and water all in one. What if there were no coconuts? You would have probably died of hunger. And I have a feeling someone has died here due to hunger." Junseo said, "Muna, if we keep eating coconut every day, we would eventually die of malnutrition. I know I would. The person you are talking about may have died from eating too many coconuts." Muna began to laugh at him. "Oh, poor Junseo. Do you have any idea how nutritious a coconut is? Please put your hatred aside. This is nothing but a blessing." "Whatever," Junseo said as he accepted one of the coconuts from Muna. He wished they would find another fruit on the island, because if he had to keep eating coconuts, he was going to go crazy. If he had to choose, he would have preferred to have a banana tree instead. Muna felt grateful as opposed to Junseo. She also didn't like coconuts that much and barely ate them back home, but she didn't have any other choice here, so she just had to love them and accept them as the best thing in the world. That was the right attitude if she wanted to survive the island. Just like yesterday, when they each drank the coconut water, it poured on Junseo's body and Muna's dress. Junseo expressed his desire to eat meat and bathe in a jacuzzi. He knew he couldn't get the latter here, but he told Muna that one of these days, he would go into the forest and hunt down an animal. Muna smiled and replied, "You should first learn how to make a fire." Her statement earned her a glare from Junseo, who angrily threw the remnant of the coconut in his hand and got up. "My body is sticky, all thanks to the sun," Junseo said. "It's time I took a bath." Muna was about to ask Junseo where precisely he intended to take his bath when she saw him taking off his briefs. She screamed and closed her eyes as Junseo guffawed his delight. "That is your punishment for making fun of me," he said. "How is it a punishment for me when you are the one getting naked?" Muna asked with her hand still covering her eyes. "If I had a camera here with me, I would have captured you and uploaded it on the internet." "You would have to open your eyes to do that," Junseo said mockingly before making his way to the water. When she realized that Junseo was gone, Muna opened her eyes and turned her back on the sea. Being a man was sure advantageous, she thought to herself. They could get naked whenever they wanted and it wouldn't be a big deal. How was she going to take her bath and wash her red gown now? She also needed to wash her hair because it was dirty and covered with sand. If she left it the way it was for a few more days, she would end up looking like a mad woman. Junseo washed his briefs and realized that he would have to walk back naked to where Muna was. He had taken them off initially to make Muna uncomfortable, but he knew that it wasn't proper for him to walk around naked. He stared at his trouser on top of the rocks and had an idea. "Muna, bring my trouser for me," he said. Muna opened her eyes in shock. This Junseo was certainly a pervert, she thought. "If you don't bring it, I will have to come get it myself." Muna rolled her eyes and said, "Come get it yourself then." As she heard Junseo approaching, Muna tore a piece of her gown and tied it around her eyes. She turned towards the sea, but she could barely see properly. "This is just perfect," she said out loud. Junseo picked up his trouser and wore it before drying his briefs on the rock. "You can open your eyes now," he said to her as he sat on the floor. Muna took the blindfold off and said, "All thanks to you, Junseo, I have come up with a very good solution to my predicament." She took the blindfold and tied it around Junseo's eyes as she said, "I need to take a bath now." "Don't peek otherwise, you will get struck by lightning." "This is awfully uncomfortable, Muna. I can't see a thing," Junseo said as Muna picked up her bra and panty. "That is the idea," Muna said. "I did it for you, so please, keep your eyes covered while I take a bath." "But I didn't ask you to do it for me," Junseo said mischievously. Muna stared at him in surprise. He was completely different from the Junseo she knew back in Seoul. Back then, he was always serious and mean. But here he was playful, pervy, mischievous, and a little bit kind. She didn't know if being inside the sea had changed him or if he was just pretending because they were alone here, but she was grateful that at least he wasn't a source of misery for her on the island. She quickly went towards the water and looked back at Junseo to confirm that he still had the blindfold on. Even though his eyes were covered, Muna wished he could look away instead of staring directly at her. She took off her red gown and dropped it on the floor while she placed her panty and bra on it. She went deep into the water and started by washing her hair. After washing her hair, she turned and somehow felt that Junseo was seeing her because he kept looking at her. Maybe she didn't tie the blindfold well. Perhaps he could still see her as she bathed naked in the water. Junseo could make out Muna's silhouette. As much as he tried, he couldn't bring himself to look away. He kept staring directly at her, and the temptation to take the blindfold off was great. He didn't want to act like a pervert and stare at her without her consent while she was bathing, which was why he still left the blindfold on. He had really gone soft on Muna here on the island, but he deliberately acted that way because he didn't want her to lose her sanity. If he decided to torture her as his mind told him to, she would be unhappy and eventually become depressed. Being stranded on this island would make everything worse, and she might even attempt suicide. The last thing he wanted was to be alone on the island. Who would keep him warm during the cold nights? Hence, he needed to treat Muna right. When they got back to Seoul, he would continue from where they left off. Muna wasn't sure if Junseo could still see her, so she decided to move deeper into the water until it almost covered her breast. She began to scrub her body with her nails and, after a while, turned again to see if Junseo was staring at her, but suddenly she felt a painful sting on her left foot and instinctively lifted it as she yelped in pain. This action made her lose her balance and fall on her back. She tried to turn her body and swim out, but the water began pulling her deeper into the sea. She realized she was going to drown to death at this rate and tried desperately to save herself without success. She soon became weak and closed her eyes as she started to drown.
Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, like, share and comment below.